June 1944, World War II, the Eastern Front. The Red Army launches Operation Bagration, a massive assault against the German troops, leading to significant Soviet advances into occupied territories. Several months later, when the Russians enter the territory of the Third Reich for the first time, they seek revenge for the horrors the Nazis inflicted in Russia. Red Army soldiers engage in widespread looting, the destruction of property, the killing of civilians, and especially the mass raping of German women. Between the months of January and August 1945, up to 2 million German women are raped by Soviet Red Army soldiers in what becomes the largest incident of mass rape ever recorded in history. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The early stages of the war saw rapid German advances in Europe, with the fall of Poland, the invasion of France, and the evacuation of British forces from Dunkirk in 1940. Following the successful campaign in France, Hitler set his sights on the Soviet Union. On Sunday, the 22nd of June 1941, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, its ally in the war against Poland. For Nazi Germany, this attack was not an ordinary military operation. The war against the Soviet Union was a war of annihilation between German fascism and Soviet communism, a racial war between German Aryans and subhuman Slavs and Jews. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazi regime unleashed a campaign of unprecedented brutality. As the German military advanced, Nazi forces, including the SS and Einsatzgruppen, which were Nazi mobile death squads, systematically targeted civilians, particularly Jews, communists, and other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. Entire villages were wiped out in mass executions, and millions of Soviet prisoners of war were subjected to starvation, forced labor, and summary execution. The siege of Leningrad and the atrocities in cities like Kiev and Minsk illustrated the Nazis' ruthless disregard for human life. In addition to mass shootings, the Nazis employed methods such as mass starvation, forced deportations, and the destruction of homes and infrastructure to break the spirit of the Soviet people. The Nazi occupation policies aimed to decimate the population and pave the way for German colonization as envisioned in Hitler's quest for Lebensraum, meaning living space. The tide of the Second World War began to shift dramatically with the defeat of the Nazis at Stalingrad in February 1943. This significant setback marked the first major defeat for Hitler's forces and set the stage for a relentless Soviet counter-offensive. Over the next year, Soviet troops pushed the Germans westward, reclaiming lost territories and advancing with increasing momentum. By mid-1944, the Red Army had driven the Nazis out of Soviet territory, and in October 1944, Soviet forces reached the border of East Prussia. As Soviet troops advanced beyond the eastern frontiers of the Third Reich and pushed deeper into German territory, the brutal reality of Red Army retribution became clear. Fueled by years of suffering, propaganda, and personal loss, the Soviet soldiers unleashed a campaign of terror against the German civilians. The most horrifying and widespread element of this revenge was the mass rape of German women. In many towns and cities, this violence was not isolated but systematic, lasting for weeks or even months. Natalia Geze, a Soviet war correspondent, later admitted that Soviet troops raped every female from 8 to 80, describing them as an army of rapists. In Berlin alone, hospitals recorded between 95,000 and 130,000 rape cases, with approximately 10,000 women dying in the aftermath, many by suicide. Across East Prussia, Silesia, and Pomerania, at least 1.4 million women were raped, and the death toll in connection with these sexual assaults is believed to have reached up to 240,000. In many cases, women were victims of repeated rapes, some as many as 60 to 70 times. This violence was not only tolerated, but expected among the Soviet ranks, and many soldiers were even involved in pedophilia. As one former Soviet officer put it, "We were young, strong, and without women for 4 years. So we tried to catch German women. 10 men raped 1 girl. There were not enough women, as the entire population had run from the Red Army. So we had to take them young, 12 or 13 years old. If they cried, we put something in their mouth. We thought it was fun. Now, I cannot understand how I did it. A boy from a good family, but that was me." A Soviet female telephone operator recalled that during the capture of each town, the first 3 days were unofficially reserved for looting and raping. She remembered one raped German woman lying naked with a hand grenade between her legs. She said, "Now I feel shame, but I didn't back then. We hated seeing their clean, undamaged white houses with roses. I wanted them to suffer." Many Red Army soldiers believed they were entitled to revenge, a twisted reward for the devastation Nazi Germany had inflicted on their homeland. One Soviet major even joked that the soldiers were so sex-starved that they raped grandmothers, and claimed that the elderly women enjoyed it. In many cases, the stereotype of Mongol hordes, long promoted by Nazi propaganda, became a terrifying reality for the German civilians. For over a decade, Nazi authorities had portrayed hordes of Mongolian savages as eager to murder, pillage, destroy, and rape, in order to rally resistance against the Soviet advance. The rapists were mainly Red Army soldiers, including men from the Far East and Central Asian republics. Survivors often describe their attackers as having Mongolian features. In basements and shelters, women huddled in silence, as husky Mongolians patrolled the streets above, wild and unpredictable. Young girls were taught to stay hidden at all costs whenever soldiers approached. Women who tried to hide were often discovered when soldiers shone flashlights into cellars and bunkers. Some women offered themselves to a single soldier, hoping it might spare them from gang rape. Magda Wieland, a young actress in Berlin, was dragged from her hiding place by a 16-year-old soldier from Central Asia. He was so excited, he ejaculated prematurely. She offered herself to him in exchange for protection, but he left to brag, and another soldier raped her. Even her Jewish friend, Ellen Goetz, was not spared and raped. When neighbors told the soldier she was Jewish, they simply replied, "Frau ist Frau," a woman is a woman. As the attacks continued, women took desperate steps to protect themselves and their children. They covered their faces in dirt, wore rags, and hid in attics or storage rooms. Girls were tucked away in closets or pantries for days. Mothers left their homes only at dawn, when soldiers were likely to be drunk or asleep. In some cases, mothers betrayed other women's hiding spots in a frantic attempt to save their own daughters. Many Berliners still recall the screams that echoed nightly through the streets lined with shattered buildings. One especially tragic case was that of Hannelore Kohl, the first wife of future West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. In May 1945, at just 12 years old, she was gang-raped by Soviet soldiers and thrown out of a first-floor window like a sack of cement. She suffered a lifelong spinal injury and chronic illness linked to her trauma. In 2001, decades later, she took her own life. The long-term consequences of these mass rapes were devastating, not only for the victims, but for German society as a whole. Many women suffered internal injuries, untreated infections, and lasting trauma. Pregnancies from the assaults often ended in miscarriages or unsafe abortions, sometimes performed without any medical help. Those who carried to term gave birth to children known as Russian children, many of whom faced stigma, abandonment, or poverty in a society still shattered by war. In Berlin, infant mortality soared, with some estimates suggesting that up to 90% of newborns did not survive during the immediate post-war period. The psychological wounds ran even deeper. Thousands of women, unable to cope with the trauma and shame, took their own lives. Some were forced to do so by their own fathers to preserve family honor. Others were murdered by husbands who accused them of allowing the Russian soldiers to rape them. Survivors who tried to move on were often met with cruelty and humiliation from their fellow Germans. They were insulted in public and threatened with further violence. Many were never able or allowed to speak of what they endured. It is estimated that up to 2 million German women were raped by Soviet soldiers, and thousands, possibly as many as 10,000 in Berlin alone, are believed to have committed suicide in the aftermath. The rape of German women by Red Army soldiers remains one of the darkest and least discussed aspects of the Second World War. It was a tragedy that reached into nearly every home in Eastern Germany and left behind generations of pain. The trauma was silenced for decades, both in Soviet and German narratives, yet for the survivors, their memories never faded. As one survivor said, "We survived the war, but we never truly survived the peace that followed."
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.